The last time President Trump got off the phone with the president of Turkey and immediately announced, "I am pulling all American troops out of Syria." The last time he did that, he lost both his defense secretary, James Mattis, and soon thereafter, his administration's point person on the fight against ISIS, Brett McGurk. They both basically resigned in protest against the president's decision. Now, Trump eventually walked back that decision, but now, less than a year later, the president has done it again. Again, after a phone call with the president of Turkey. And although former Defense Secretary James Mattis refuses to say anything about President Trump at all, Mr. McGurk had some choice words for the president today. Brett McGurk served as senior director for Iraq and Afghanistan in the George W. Bush White House. He then was, as I mentioned, the special envoy for the campaign against ISIS under President Obama. Then that's a role that he continued under President Trump until he resigned in protest at the end of last year. Mr. McGurk writes today, quote, "Trump twice abruptly reversed course after, one, a foreign leader call, and two, without consulting his own military advisors. If anyone still believes Trump cares about Syria, they're mistaken. He doesn't, and his erratic swings heighten risk to our personnel on the ground. The U.S. leads a coalition that includes over 80 countries and nearly 24 contributors to the military and/or stabilization mission in Syria. Leading a coalition requires consultation with coalition partners before major decisions are taken. This is elementary. The consequences of such unreliability from the Oval will reverberate well beyond Syria. The value of an American handshake is depreciating. Trump said today we could crush ISIS again if it regenerated. With whom? What allies would sign up? Who would fight on his assurances? Bottom line, these are matters of war and peace, life and death. Our military personnel, friends and allies deserve deliberation and thought before decisions are made. That's the essence of command. Erratic swings favor far more patient adversaries in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. Joining us now is Brett McGurk, former special presidential envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. Mr. McGurk, it's a real honor to have you here tonight. Thanks very much for making time.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote today pointedly that a move like this one from the president, which you clearly think is very, very problematic, both in its substance and in its process, you said that it would favor adversaries, more patient adversaries from Moscow to Beijing to Tehran. Why did you single out Russia and China and Iran, and why does this benefit them?
Well, the essence of foreign policy decision-making and matters of war and peace. Look, presidents do a lot of things, but this is the most important thing they do. Make decisions about our military personnel. And we know from history that if those decisions are not made with deliberation, with thought, with analysis, with facts, we can get ourselves into some trouble. We face in the world competitors and adversaries in Beijing and in Moscow in particular that have very long-term time horizons. They are patient, they are deliberate, they are implementing a long-term plan. In the region of the Middle East, Iran is doing the same thing. And we have President Trump, who these wild swings in policy, I think, is really increasing the risk, not only to our personnel on the ground, most importantly, but devaluate our ability to really exercise leadership and power in the world. And when I say devaluing the value of an American handshake, you know, American diplomats are on the front lines all around the world. We've seen this most recently in Ukraine with what our diplomats are doing in Kyiv, trying to manage this most difficult situation. And the value of an American handshake used to really mean something. I mean, I was part of the process that built this global coalition against ISIS, almost 80 countries, one of the largest coalitions in the world. And we were there from the United States, and we needed help, and we needed your support, and we needed your troops, and we needed your forces and your money. And countries signed up because they trusted us. And that is becoming much, much more difficult, because diplomats aren't speaking for the country because nobody knows what Donald Trump will do from day to day. So I think it's dangerous, and I would just really encourage him and anyone who can influence him to get back to a deliberative process before these most consequential decisions are made, because the consequences can be quite far-reaching.
The prospect of a deliberate process on national security matters or on any policy matters in this White House feels feels more and more remote with each passing day. The policy process, as it would be recognized in any other administration, just doesn't seem to exist in this administration, especially in matters that have the president directly involved. I am struck by the fact in light of that, that when you resigned and when Secretary Mattis resigned over the last time the president made a sort of rash and erratic and unexplained decision on Syria, that was also right after he got off the phone with the Turkish leader Erdogan. And James Laporta at Newsweek today has a scary story in which he uses a National Security Council source who tells him that on that phone call, the person heard the phone call, the president just got rolled, that Erdogan just basically manipulated him into making this rash decision. Is there something about the president and one-on-one conversations with foreign leaders like Erdogan or others that he's particularly susceptible to?
The president, it's a lot of bluster, and then when the plans and policies meet friction in the real world, which any policy does, he tends to just totally back down. So we've seen this on Iran, in which he's implementing a maximalist policy on Iran, in which we're trying to just strangle their economy, and Iran is going to react. And then the onus is on President Trump. How are you going to react? When it comes to Turkey, 2 calls in a row, the president just completely backed down. I've been on a lot of foreign leader calls with multiple presidents, and these calls are usually, I was in the Bush administration in particular, I was in the Oval Office with President Bush, a number of calls with Erdogan and others. They're very well prepared. Mr. President, here's what you're likely to hear. Here's how we think you should answer that. If he says this, take it back, say that we'll consult and advise. It's for a president to make a major decision, which involves matters of war and peace, immediately after a foreign leader call, I think is almost historically unprecedented, because there's no consultation with the national security team, with military commanders, to think through the costs and consequences of different courses of action. So it's very odd. You've seen the administration, as you reported, Rachel, trying to walk back the decision today. And we might get into a place again, which I think is the worst place to be, in which the president is making very clear to the world that he wants out of Syria, but the national security team is trying to find a way to stay in Syria, and you just buy enough time until you have another crisis with Trump. So it's a dangerous situation, but I hope Americans are in their thoughts. We have Americans on the ground in Syria. I spent a lot of time in Syria in this war against ISIS. I used to go in there every couple months. And we have people on the ground tonight who are there under President Trump's orders, and they really have no idea what they're supposed to do. And that is just unacceptable if you're the commander-in-chief. This is the most solemn obligation for a president. And what he did last night just threw this entire policy process into disarray and left our people out there totally exposed.
Brett McGurk, former special presidential envoy for the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS. You have a choice about whether or not to speak about these matters, given your government service. And I really, really appreciate and think it's a real service to the public that you're willing to do interviews like this and talk about what you know. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.